So, for this episode, we went out and asked 4 questions to some of you. First, how many antibiotics can you name?
The one antibiotic at the top of my mind all the time is azithromycin.
I can think of Norflox TZ, Tenicid.
I think I can only name 2 to 3 antibiotics, not many, such as amoxicillin and some other such stuff.
Azithromycin, augmentin, Sinarest, enteroquinol, and lemonade.
Second, what do you think antibiotics are prescribed for? What do they treat?
Mainly viral infections.
To kill any virus or if you have any illness.
Usually take antibiotics for my sore throat and throat infection, which I'm very much prone to.
For infections, could be viral, could be bacterial, or could be like a wound or a cut, or after getting my tattoos done, stuff like that.
They are mostly used for in cases where there's been some bacterial infection or there's a risk of bacterial infection. For example, in several operations also they use it.
Third, how often have you taken antibiotics this year?
Sometimes it's for 5 days, sometimes it goes up to a week or 10 days.
I've at least had 7 of them.
So I've been very ill throughout the year. I think 7 or 8 courses so far.
Recently I got ear infection, so at that time I used antibiotic and for viral infections.
Sometimes I don't know what these medicines do, so I just take them on my own as well.
And fourth, how often do you complete an antibiotics course?
I finish the course of antibiotics for depending upon how serious my infection are or how is it. Sometimes it's for 5 days, sometimes it goes up to a week or 10 days.
I normally try to finish the course, but it usually happens that I'm not able to finish the course, and it's a habit that every time I miss a tablet and I miss a dose. So yeah, I don't finish the course.
90% of the times I've finished my courses. But yeah, sometimes I was better, so I left it.
I usually finish the course very regularly because it is advised to do so, and I'm able to, take all of them.
All of them.
Now, I played these responses to my colleague and ET's pharma guru, Vikas Dandekar. And this was his reaction.
Anirban, this is unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. These are actually the big problem that we are facing. Each of the reactions actually go to show how badly we need education, how badly we need to have enough controls on antibiotics. Some of them said they take it for viral infections. Some of them say they self-medicate. All of these are actually the real reasons why we have reached this extremely dire situation of antimicrobial resistances. And this is exactly what we are trying to address.
Well, clearly, overconsumption of antibiotics in India is becoming a massive, massive problem. In a recent article, Vikas wrote that as many as 47% of all antibiotics used in India are unapproved by the Central Drug Administration. The result? Antimicrobial resistance. For example, studies have found that resistance to a strong antibiotic called carbapenem was over 87% in 2021. What does that mean? That through overconsumption of these medicines, our bodies are now resisting them. So, they won't be able to do what they're supposed to, that is, kill the bacteria and treat us. And now you have another mutant problem, superbugs, or bacteria that have inherent abilities to resist antibiotics. So the issue is big. Just how big? And what is being done in India and of course across the world to solve it? We try to answer these and many more questions in this 2-part special series on India's dangerous misuse of antibiotics. Welcome to the first one. It's Friday, the 15th of November. I'm your host, Anirban Chaudhary, and this is the Morning Brief. Let's get back to my conversation with Vikas.
So we need to recognize the issue more because it has become a very, very big problem. I'll explain why. Because, for simple throat infections or for cough, we often see people actually running to the chemists and looking for drugs like azithromycin or even augmentin. Now, it's almost known now that people can actually get these medicines over the counter, and that's strictly a no no because these are antibiotics and they work only on bacterial infections. Now, it might provide some relief, but people are generally not aware of the risks and the dangers that brings with such loose and freely available drugs. And now we have reached a situation that many of these antibiotics actually don't work. Then, okay, if the first line of antibiotics is not working, then you go for the second line, then the third line. Now we have reached a stage where in hospitals, people go for treatment of certain disease, maybe for a cesarean section, maybe for which is for pregnancies or for maybe bypass surgeries or for some respiratory infections. Unfortunately, they may have hospital acquired infections, which are again bacterial infections, and it turns to be very fatal. So I have seen a close friend actually, his father admitted in a hospital, 72 years old, had some general chest infection. It was later found that there was hospital acquired infection called Acinetobacter, which is very deadly, and the person passed away. So, unknowingly and
Right.
invisibly, we have a problem right there.
And to understand the problem better, from a physician's or a medical practitioner's point of view, I'd like to go to a brilliant conversation, Vikas, that you had with Dr. Vinny Kantru, a senior consultant, respiratory, critical care, and sleep medicine at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals in Delhi. Let's listen in.
Dr. Kantru, we'd like to know from you exactly what's the situation like in India on AMRs. I did see a guideline from ICMR, which actually had a very detailed document on how to use, how to restrict use of antibiotics, how education can be given to patients. What are the ground situations that you are actually seeing right now?
It has to be an important issue because this is going to affect a lot of the practice which we do in the hospital, because a lot of burden in our hospital is related to the infectious diseases wherein we need to prescribe antimicrobial agents. The problem is universal. It's not only present in India, wherein every policy maker and doctors, as well as infectious diseases specialists and the microbiologists and all the government officials, they need to sit down and formulate stricter guidelines, stricter rules and regulations which need to be followed in each and every hospital of the country as well as worldwide. Now, we do see a lot of antimicrobial resistance in the hospital, and that is not primarily due to the fact that these antimicrobials are abused in cities. It is also due to the fact that antimicrobials are prescribed more than they should be in smaller cities, as well as for infections where we may not be needing any kind of antimicrobials to be prescribed. So, yes, the problem is universal.
Dr. Kantru, will it be possible for you to share some examples? Because, I have heard cases where patients had gone in for cardiac surgeries and probably got hospital acquired infections and it turned fatal. Similar cases have come in the case of UTIs and, of course, a lot of respiratory infections. Have you also seen a rising trend in those cases in your hospitals?
Yeah, there is a definite rising trend as far as nosocomial infections are concerned, which means that you acquire the infection while you are in the hospital, or if you have been recently hospitalized, the flora which you are carrying inside your mouth and your mucosal surfaces changes. Now, these organisms are known as commensals. But once we are in the hospital, we are on antimicrobial agents. These commensals, they get killed and are replaced by more resistant and, so to say, harder kind of microorganisms, which are not easier to eradicate from the body and which can lead to disease state beyond your hospitalization, for which you were not primarily admitted to the hospital in the first place. So which means that if you've had a cardiac surgery, if you have had a device implanted, for example, for your arrhythmia, you have acquired an infection which has infected the device, and then this device unfortunately needs to be removed because now the infection is not getting better, or you need long-term antimicrobial agents for these kind of problems. So
Right. I was actually going to come to that because, within the hospital setting, you will, as a ethical organization with a number of hospitals across the country, you will follow the Indian and global protocols. But what when the patient actually goes out and then, there is a massive self-prescription and overuse of medicines, because we have seen people actually going across the counter, over the counter, getting azithromycin. Sometimes I have even seen augmentin being just given without any prescription. So that's a much more deeper problem to have.
Oh, not sometimes. I would say most of the times these days, patients, they start augmentin on their own, thinking that I have yellow phlegm, I'm getting a viral infection, and it needs an antimicrobial agent. Unfortunately, the viral infections are not amenable to antibacterial agents. Now, this needs to be ingrained into the psyche of many people that viruses are not killed by antibacterial agents, and each and every one of them need to be targeted with a particular kind of antimicrobial agent, which can be antifungal, antiviral, antiparasitic agent, or maybe another chemical agents which are required for these. And you require a lot of knowledge, not only of the antimicrobial agent, but also the right dosing and where to use, which route of administration is to be used, because you might be knowing that a particular antibiotic is working for a particular disease, but you may not be knowing that it doesn't penetrate the tissue where the infection is. So a lot of factors are involved.
How do you see the future rolling? Because we have seen just a couple of companies really taking interest in research in anti-infectives. Already, probably it's a situation of crisis when you actually see that some of these most potent restrictive drugs also not working.
If you ask me, yes, there is a deficiency of newer antimicrobial agents, because if you see history, when penicillin was discovered in 60s and then some of the antibiotics were discovered in 70s, after that there has not been much of the progress in terms of newer antimicrobial agents in the 90s and the 2000s. So we do require newer antibiotics, because if you see history also, long-term usage of these antimicrobial agents also makes these organisms used to this kind of an environment. They develop mechanisms by which they can overcome these kind of antimicrobial agents. So that is why we do need newer kind of antimicrobial agents, where we have a choice from 4 to 5 antibiotics to choose from. So I'm happy that many of the pharma companies have come forward in terms of research so that we can get these newer kind of antimicrobial agents. But at the same time, we have to attack the bugs and the problem of AMR from all the ends, which includes the prescription writing, which has to be very, very rational. And this will be involving the education of the primary care physicians, as well as the upgradation and regular education of all the physicians involved across the country. So NMC must come up with something which is the continued medical education for all the doctors, which has to be updated at least every 2 years, which is a norm in the UK. So that kind of a system can work in India also, wherein we have to, tick mark certain pointers in the CV, wherein we are told that, every 2 years you have to undergo this course so that you get updated every time. So I think that will, to a large extent, make this education possible in the country as well for the doctors.
Dr. Kantrud, do you see a role for the regulatory agencies to play about monitoring of data? You mentioned about the rigorous task of generating data, what antibiotic has been used at what stage. Do you think all of this is actually going into some kind of an actionable program? Are we doing enough at that level?
So, definitely, we are not doing enough. The problem with us is we work in, if you think about it, in every organization, we work as silos. So, we have to work in unison. The national body has to come up with rules and regulation wherein they are collecting the data not only from the private hospitals but also from the public hospitals regularly on the antimicrobial surveillance and stewardship, what all organisms are being grown in the patients, and what are anti-infective agents are getting resistant in the country. But yes, as you said, in September, ICMR also has come up with the proposal of generating data from India and getting antimicrobial guidelines into play, which will be coming up very, very soon. And there will be rules and regulation for prescription of each and every antimicrobial agent. Now, if there is this curve of regulation of doctors which is coming in, I'm afraid it's not going to solve the whole of the issue, because as we spoke about it, the availability of OTC medication, the use of antimicrobial in poultry industry, if that is kept uncurbed, it's going to be a huge problem, because the multi-pronged approach is going to work, not that we will be working in silos and focusing our energies only on the doctors is not going to help, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's a pretty stark reality check. Very grim, actually. So, okay, Vikas, let's look at this problem from another side. Explain to me this issue from the point of view of the pharma industry.
So, this is mostly a very serious concern, but antibiotics in India are selling very heavily. Year on year, I think the market is about 25,000 crore. In fact, Augmentin, which is a GSK product, is about 850 crore annual sales, and that's the highest selling product in India. Now, that also shows that how much it has been actually consumed. Hospitals need to actually put up something called antimicrobial stewardship programs, like how much you actually educate your doctors to prescribe antibiotics in layers, in the stages that it should be given, how much of your field staff, the paramedic staff or the nurses or the support staff is actually educated, how much involvement is from the patients and their families side. So all of these things are very important. Now, apart from the medicines that people actually take, there is already very clear indication that poultry farms use a lot of carbapenems, which is a very highly potent antibiotic, to grow chickens so that they grow quickly and they grow healthy, and just to increase the production. And when that enters the food chain, even if you are not actually having the antibiotic yourself, by that indirect mean, you are actually having some antibiotic in your body. So this is a very, very serious case. We know world over about 4.8 to 5 million deaths are reported directly attributable to antimicrobial resistances. The
Got it.
bigger problem is, Anirban, there is no medicine which is really working now. I mean, we are at that kind of a risk situation that very few medicines work against superbugs. And that is the question to be answered.
So, Vikas, on this, you had a brilliant conversation with Dr. Manish Paul, who is an absolutely big name in drug discovery and development. In fact, he's part of Orchid Pharma. Why don't we go over to that discussion?
Oh, right. Yes, that was a very interesting discussion. Dr. Paul actually took us through the entire stages of discovery and the challenges that are being faced. So, yeah, let's listen in. Dr. Paul, I'd start from asking you, how do you think this whole emergence of AMR, antimicrobial resistance, is happening? And if you can give us some global context to it.
Thank you, Vikas, for the question. I think the global AMR it's been a very long time that has been with us. It is not a new thing. The antimicrobial resistance has been with the human existence since time immemorial. But it is only that we have discovered it after we invented the antibiotics. And we started figuring it out. How do we address this challenge since the older antibiotics are becoming ineffective? So if you want to look at some of the numbers, global R&D work on AMR has shown that by 2050, the death rate is going to be significantly higher. And that is where the challenge comes in. And many of the lower and middle income countries are being blamed, especially for, I call it blamed, because in the Western or the developed countries, there are enough data documentation facilities available. And so they can point out exactly what is the rate of AMR. Unlike the lower middle income countries where such tools are not completely robust, nor are they deployed well enough. So the numbers are very skewed and small numbers may look very extrapolated. But well, there are several impacts which global AMR challenges pose. One could be the death rate. Other is the economic burden which it brings upon. That is a bigger challenge because it is estimated that by 2050 about the $100 trillion are going to be, at stake.
So, Dr. Paul, with so much at stake, and we know the consequences, the fatal incidences that have happened due to AMR, why do you think global companies are reluctant or probably haven't shown that kind of an interest that they have in segments like oncology or neuroscience? This is as serious as any other catastrophe that can happen, right?
The major reason is the economic factors. The ROI on an anti infective product is significantly lower compared to any other therapeutic area that you just now cited, like oncology or metabolic disorders. The reason is it takes several years and the dollar value is very high before we could invent a molecule. And unfortunately, by the time the molecule reaches the market, the patent life is so low. To add to that, the duration of treatment of antibiotics is maybe at the most 21 days. Usually 14 days is maximum treatment days, unless there is chronic infections, which is a smaller number of patients who undergo that. So when somebody invents a molecule and wants to commercialize, the days of treatment is very less. But in oncology, which the value is higher, and metabolic disorders or lifestyle disorders, the ROI is for lifetime of an individual. So that is one of the reasons why most of the companies are not venturing into it. And then the regulatory challenges before it reaches the market, the safety issues. And add to that, the scientific complexity. I say scientific complexity because microbes are way ahead of the game in most of the anti-infective drug discovery because microbes know almost every structure we can think of that exists in nature. And they would evaluate and see, okay, this is the new molecule which has come into existence. Okay, let us trigger this activity now, how to beat the new antibiotic. The reason being, in as much as human beings, we want to survive and live on this world, microbes also want to do the same thing. So it's a survival of the fittest, essentially.
So, coming to the situation that we have in India, we have heard about very tragic stories where hospital acquired infections have actually led to deaths. People have gone to do bypass and then were not able to come back because of ventilator acquired pneumonia or some other hospital acquired infections. We have seen the way antibiotics are sold almost over the counter. There are no restrictions, though on the regulatory side, all of these do apply. But in practice, chemists do give antibiotics even on asking. How do you think all of this will evolve? As you mentioned, these microbes or pathogens will have the power to overcome the newer inventions.
That's an excellent question. I'll have two-part answer to that. The first part is a stewardship angle. How do we prevent when we have over-the-counter medications, right? How do you prevent AMR? That is by introducing community stewardship. I say community stewardship is when we are equipped with the required knowledge, we will not do those mistakes. Now, in India, I feel there are very few people who really understand what is antimicrobial resistance, what is that they can do as citizens of the country and the world, what they can do to prevent this AMR from becoming nasty in the future. The dangers of it is not that information doesn't exist among the general population, right? So that is where community stewardship is one thing. If we do, if every government across the country starts implementing it, I think that education is going to empower us. The other aspect is how do we address the bacteria which keep on evolving. What we did was we looked at already existing antibiotics which are becoming resistant due to a mechanism which the bacteria is using, right? So we are trying to do prolong the life of an antibiotic. We have to try and use molecules to hit their defense mechanisms rather than their essential structures. This is one strategy, in addition to what we are trying to inactivate the bacteria themselves.
What would be the addressable market, Dr. Paul, for the new generation of antibiotics from the Indian standpoint and from the global point of view? Would you have some data to throw?
So, if we look at that particular angle, antibiotics are required in every therapeutic area. But in India now, there are critical care markets, right? That is where we need more antibiotics to come in, so that when a patient becomes really critical, we are now tapping into those antibiotics which are toxic to body, like tigecycline or colistin or polymyxin. These are the antibiotics are very, very harmful to human body. But we have to go to that so that we can save the patient first and then repair the organs which got impacted because of that. So we should not end up in that situation. But at the same time, I would definitely, stress on the point that as government, if we bring in restrictive methods of dispensing antibiotics, just like narcotics, which cannot be just bought by anybody. So if we bring in such regulations, I think we will be way far ahead. And as a country, we will never be blamed for being a center of AMR and things like that, which I don't believe it is even now. It is just we have got very limited data to be blamed like that. So it is a collective effort. Pharma companies, as a community, and as regulators. All three of us should come together. Only then I think we can definitely address this challenge of AMR in our country and the world.
So, from a value standpoint, some of the estimates drawn for enmetazobactam was about 2 billion in lifetime peak sales and about 200 to 300 million dollar in terms of average sales through I think the patent period ends 2031-32, right? So, would that be a safe estimate, Dr. Paul?
Anti-infective market is a huge market, and we all know about it. And the market is threatened by the way the resistance develops. Now we may predict, okay, hypothetically, you now the numbers you gave, that is a predicted number. But if the bugs decide to take over us, those numbers become fictitious again. So that is the threat again. Why everyone is scared to invest into antibiotic R&D, because the future is unpredicted. But in human other non-microbial areas of diseases, what human bodies have, the structures are defined then compared to other than oncology. They don't change so often. So they know exactly, as a pharma company, we know in this area, I can definitely get my ROI. But in anti-infectives, I am not sure, because when the microbes' collective intelligence will come into play and they will beat our molecule like just in a heartbeat.
So, Vikas, that was, for want of a better word, really nuanced and technical for someone like me, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners as well. Why don't you, for the benefit of the listener, give me 3 key takeaways from your conversation with Dr. Paul?
My bigger question to him was, why is there so less interest in a challenge which is actually staring in our faces, and there is not much of a solution that is coming, to which Dr. Paul was very clear that the incentives, the return on investment in antibiotic research is not as good as other segments of pharmaceuticals like oncology or neuroscience or metabolic disorders. Secondly, he also mentioned that even if you have these medicines coming, patent life is very short, because most of the time has been exhausted in clinical development. And then thirdly, you keep beating the superbugs because they are smart. He was very clear on those scientific aspects. He was saying, have these mechanisms in which they actually keep building their defenses against anything new that comes their way. So you cannot have a situation where it gets completely eliminated.
On that grim note, and this is a grim subject, we will end this episode. In the second part, we'll look at how the rest of the world, the global medical and pharma fraternity, is dealing with this problem. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Vinay Joshi and sound designed by Rajas Nayak. Do like, share, and subscribe if you like this episode. Keep listening to us wherever you get your podcasts. This is your host Anirban Chaudhary signing off. Have a good weekend.